Rick Odioso is the media director for the PGA Tour's Valspar Championship, staged annually at the Innisbrook Resort near Tampa, Florida. Rick's introduction to Tampa Bay was in the NFL with the Buccaneers, where he was in the PR department for nearly 20 years, shepherding names like John McKay and Doug Williams. His path includes a stint as the stat guy in the booth with John Madden and Pat Summerall, and he went to school at Notre Dame, where he rubbed shoulders with Joe Montana and Rudy. You like stories? Rick's got stories. Rick Odioso, my guest on Media Credentials.
I demand satisfaction.
My name is Whit Watson, and this is Media Credentials. I'm a sports announcer who's worked a lot of places. This podcast will peel back the layers of sports media and show you how the sausage gets made. Through interviews with industry pros and my own experience, you'll understand why you're seeing what you're seeing and who's responsible for it. Your media credentials have been approved. Several years ago, Rick Odioso invited me to join a fantasy golf league made up of pseudo-celebrity media members who covered the Valspar Championship. Every year, we pool our money and pick weekly winners on the PGA Tour, and all the proceeds go to charity. When I asked Rick to be a guest on the pod, I knew about his connection to golf, and I knew he had a former life in PR for the Bucs. I did not know that he was present when John Madden and Pat Summerall worked on TV together for the very first time. I didn't know about his time at Notre Dame with Montana and Rudy, or that he was with the Irish when they won a national championship under Ara Parsegan. My vision for the podcast was to platform people who work behind the scenes in sports media. And truth be told, I also just like to hear cool stories. This episode checks all the boxes. Rick, I'm glad we could find time to get together, and I have to start by saying congratulations. For the last few years, Valspar media members have been competing in a fantasy golf league that you manage, and that's not suspect at all, the fact that you won it this year. So congratulations. Credit where credit is due. How are you?
I'm good. John Rahm at the Masters and Scotty Scheffler were good picks for me, so we were very fortunate to hang on. It was a very close competition at the end. The way we work the league is that if you finish in the top five, you get to make a charitable donation. And we should say, we're in the top five of something like about 20 competitors. And so we each are able to make charitable donations. I'm going with a group called Just Bikes that puts together bikes on the cheap with donations for people that need them. And I know you're helping the First Tee of Central Florida, so that's great.
Do you have any idea, as the stat guy, as a media guy, how much money we've given to charity with this league over the years?
Probably about $15,000, I would think. I guess I hadn't thought of it. It's evolved from $1,000 total contribution to about $2,000 now. So yeah, maybe about 15,000, 10,000. But yeah. And a wide variety of charities, because every year, basically, we've had a good separation of winners. And except for the year Todd Callis, now the voice of the Houston Astros, won 3 straight years, we've had a lot of different winners. So that's good.
Yeah, Todd was on a run there for a few years. So let's go back to the beginning. Where did you grow up? And tell me about your schooling and your path.
I grew up in 3 places. I was born in Pittsburgh, grade school in New Jersey, and high school in Cincinnati. And from there, I went to Notre Dame. And when I was at Notre Dame, I started working in the sports information office as a side job that paid a little bit off the tuition. And we had some interesting things happen. The movie Rudy of Rudy movie, he was in my class. And he didn't actually live in the football stadium, but he did live in the basketball arena where the sports information offices were. So we saw him quite a bit. Joe Montana's first wife was the secretary in the sports information office, so he would come by to help us clip papers after practice. It was an interesting time. Notre Dame had a good basketball team with Digger Phelps. I was there when the UCLA 71-game winning streak ended, and Notre Dame won a national championship in football my sophomore year under Ara Parsegan, and I was at the Sugar Bowl game, 1 point win over Alabama. So it was a very interesting college time, and it fueled me to do some more in sports.
That is a Forrest Gump level of involvement of activities,
Right.
notable pieces of history that you were there for. What was it about the sports information department, other than the chance to, as you said, pay off a little bit of tuition? What grabbed you about sports information and media relations?
Well, I think it's funny. I took a test in high school about what do you, if you were on a race car team, would you rather be the driver, or would you rather be the guy that built the engine, or would you rather, do the driver's hair or whatever? There were like 10 choices, and I would pick something like I'd like to publicize. I like telling people things that A, they don't know, and B, they say, oh, that's interesting. I mean, I don't like telling people things they don't know that they say, why are you telling me that? But if I can say, oh, I didn't know that, that's interesting, that's probably the thing that I like to do. And I found you could do that in sports information or the media. I wasn't sure whether I was going to be part of it, from the inside, the team side, or from the media side. And it turns out I've been a little of both.
So, what was your first real job, if you will, in sports media, in media relations?
Well, actually, yeah, it was kind of funny. I mean, I did go to law school for a couple of years, but Bob Best, who was the assistant sports information director at Notre Dame when I was there, he became the PR director for the Buccaneers, and he reached out to me. And after, there were he interviewed some other people too, but eventually he hired me. And so in 1978, I was the assistant PR director of the Buccaneers, which was also Doug Williams' rookie season. So I was with the Buccaneers in a variety of capacities for 19 seasons, most notably during John McKay's run, where we went to, the Bucs went to the playoffs in just their fourth year, which was a lot harder to do than it is now because there wasn't free agency. So that was a great achievement. And so I was there for the whole Doug Williams run. I'm kind of a Doug Williams expert on what happened to him and how he came to eventually become a Super Bowl champion. And still great to see Doug out and about from time to time.
John McKay, of the best line in coaching history, how do you feel about your team's execution? I'm in favor of it. What was he like in person?
John McKay was at his very best with about 5 or 6 people. And he could be good one-on-one. He was actually kind of shy and didn't really like big crowds. And so, he wasn't going to jump into a mosh pit and start shaking everybody's hand. But if you could get him over a dinner table or in his office telling stories, he was great. And very, very smart, ahead of his time. And certainly, what his record both in college and with the Buccaneers kind of speaks for itself. It'd be interesting to wonder what if he had stayed at USC, how many championships he would have won. He won 3 national championships there. But it's kind of funny. The Buccaneers job presented him a chance to he had 4 kids, and he really wasn't making all that much money at USC. And he had a chance to make more money with the Buccaneers, came to love Tampa, and stayed there the rest of his life.
You've already mentioned Doug Williams as someone who made an impression on you with the Buccaneers. There was a real cast of characters over the 2 decades that you were in Tampa. Steve Young was there for 1 season at quarterback. Vinny Testaverde spent several years as the starter. Sam Weish, very briefly, a head coach in Tampa.
4 seasons. Ray Perkins, 4 years. Sam Weish, 4 years. I remember, it's funny now when you think about how now everybody's got big interview areas in their facilities. And when somebody comes to town, there's a big press conference and they're met. And when Steve Young signed, I met him and Lee Steinberg. I was the guy as the assistant I guess I was the PR director then. And we ate a late meal at Denny's, like about midnight when he got in on his flight. And the next day we did a small press conference. So it really was a kind of a different era. I mean, so you get close to people. And Steve was great. And we had Steve DeBerg as a quarterback, and he was an underrated player. So yes, it was a lot of fun.
And my question was going to be, who were some other characters, whether on the field or behind the scenes, that made an impression on you with the Buccaneers?
Boy, there were a lot. I mean, I don't know. DeBerg made an impression. We had a cornerback on the championship team named Mike Washington, who I really liked. He had been one of the first players to integrate at Alabama, and then he played for McKay and was a very good underrated cornerback with the Bucs. And he went on to be an SEC on-field official. Mike didn't like to fly, so he would drive to all his game assignments. Even when he worked the Fiesta Bowl in Arizona, he drove from Alabama. So who else? Ricky Bell.
Yeah.
I was there for that time. I was the one who told John McKay that Ricky Bell had passed, and he had a great respect for Ricky. And I can still remember kind of like the sound he made when I said, "Ricky's gone," and it was he was hurt to his soul. Ricky. It was a shame about Ricky because Ricky was really good. And then he got a contract extension, and he didn't play as well. And, everybody wondered, what's wrong with Ricky? What's wrong with Ricky? And it was turned out to be just the first stages of the ALS that would claim his life. But it reduced his performance such that people were saying that he wasn't, people probably doubted him, doubted his character. And then when we found out what had happened, it was sad that we had.
Before we get to the golf side, and you've been the media director at the Valspar Championship for 27 years, you've stayed in the NFL as a statistician. And the note you wrote me earlier, your 46th total season in the NFL, 19 with the Bucs and 27 with Fox Sports. Currently, you're the statistician for the Chris Myers, Robert Smith booth. But I want to ask you about the obvious one. You, for 5 years, were in the booth with Pat Summerall and John Madden as a statistician.
Right. It's kind of funny. I started right there at the top, but they were looking for somebody the year I became available as a free agent, and I was fortunate to have that run. I don't know if this is exact. I'm going to say it's true till somebody else says it wasn't. John Madden and Pat Summerall's first game was November 29th, 1979, a game, the Vikings and the Buccaneers, and they were they hadn't been working with each other all year, but they were put together for that game. So I, in my role as the assistant PR guy for the Buccaneers, I talked to both of them that day. And actually, I gave John Madden a ride to the airport. It was like an hour after the game, and they said, John Madden needs a ride for the airport. I was surprised he was still there. So I gave him a ride to the airport, and that proved to be the last plane flight that John Madden ever took. He was on a connection in Houston. He got off in Houston, and I think he took a train or a bus or somehow back to Oakland where he lived, and never flew a plane again. So so I talked to them both the day they did their first game, and then the last game they worked together for Fox, the Super Bowl in New Orleans. I was there also, so and talked to them, working with them. So that's kind of my little John Madden, Pat Summerall link. Madden who was a friend of McKay's. I think was he on his staff at SC? But anyway, they had a connection back when they were young people. And Madden was a lot like McKay in that he was really great if you could get him with 6, 8, 10 people sitting around a table and telling stories. And I feel very privileged that I've been a fly on the wall when both McKay and Madden were holding court.
That was exactly the term that I was about to use, being a fly on the wall. What made Summerall and Madden such a terrific combination?
Well, first of all, Summerall was not in love with the sound of his own voice, although he had one of the great voices of all time. But he didn't need to. He said more with less. He had a very minimal spotting board, for example. It just basically had the guy's name and number on it. He wasn't cluttering it up with notes or anything. And if it got on the air, it was something that Summerall remembered. And it's not to say he didn't prepare, because he did, but he gave rein to let John Madden do his thing, which nobody had ever done like that before, and arguably no one's ever done it like that since. And then he was a master of coming back at the end with a pithy little couple words that just put an exclamation point on it. So yeah, it was a wonderful thing to watch and listen to.
Summerall was one of the first announcers I can remember who would simply say the player's name, and that was his call, rather than describing the action. It's TV. We can see it too. But he would just identify the player by name as the guy that made the play.
Right. And then usually, wrap it up with, if it was a big play, my little contribution would be to hold up a card with the amount of yards on it.
Right.
And maybe the tackler, but whatever. But yeah, he very much understood that John Madden was the star of the show, which actually worked out to make Summerall a star of the show too, because he wasn't, his lines and comments were so short, they became even more memorable.
You also had the chance to work with Dick Stockton for a long time, who is one of my Hall of Fame voices, influences coming up. That experience, what was that like?
Oh, well, Dick Stockton was great too, and much like Summerall, he was again he was all about letting the game flow. He didn't want to clutter things up with too much stuff. He had such a great voice and such a great call. I mean, the three people I've worked with, Pat Summerall, Dick Stockton, and Chris Myers, I think the one thing that stands out about all three of them is they all have very distinctive, authoritative voices. And I'm not sure that there are some play-by-play guys that are very competent and good, but I'm not sure that there are that many that have just a distinctive, authoritative voice anymore.
You're currently based in Tampa still,
right?
And still work Rays games and Lightning games. What role do you play there?
Much the same. My baseball job is called statistician, but I would argue it's probably even more spotter, like who's warming up in the bullpen, trying to spot somebody coming out to pinch hit, making sure that Dewayne Staats has knowledge of all the moves that are making, even as he's figuring out what he's going to say, and conversing with Brian Anderson, our analyst. So I do that, and then also if a hitting streak extends, or we try to be on that. Dwayne's kind of, when I think about it, I'm so lucky to work with him too, because again, he's a legend of the game. He's been, he worked for the Yankees, did national TV, and then has been such a great voice for the Rays over the years.
Yeah, he's another one that I'd put on the top shelf. I had the chance to work on that broadcast as a sideline reporter a number of years ago, and Dwayne is another straight shooter. You're not going to get a whole lot extra from him, but he's also got almost institutional knowledge of the Rays. I mean,
right.
He doesn't need notes because he can remember the last time that happened. And
right.
It seems like we have fewer and fewer announcers in general that possess that kind of longevity, don't you think?
Right. I mean, as being affiliated with one team. And then I think we've been very blessed the last, closing in on a decade now, to have Brian Anderson as our analyst, because he's, and again, he and Dwayne make a great team, much the same way that Madden and Summerall did. In that, I would say Dwayne is kind of like the string that to Brian's balloon, and so he keeps him from wandering off too far and pulling him back from whatever ramble he's going on. But Brian's a blessing to listen to too.
So let's take it now to the golf side. How did you begin to get involved in the PGA Tour space?
Well, my time with the Buccaneers came to an end in 1996, and I didn't want to leave Tampa, and so I was casting about for what my next step might be, and I was able to get on with Fox, and also I knew somebody who was involved with what was then the J.C. Penney Classic Mixed Team event. Talked to Gerald Goodman, the tournament director, and again, it's amazing the growth in some of these organizations. When I worked for the Bucs in the 70s and 80s, I mean, there really were only about 7 or 8 people working in the front office for the Bucs. I mean, seriously, once you got past the football operation, I remember there was one time that the Bucs had a deal for 12 cars from Nissan. And my position, I was just the assistant PR director. And it was, and that included the coaching staff, which was like 8 people. McKay had a separate arrangement. And I would go back and forth as to whether I got the last car. So if they added an extra coach, okay, Rick, you got to turn your car in. Okay, we're going short this year. You get a car. And now, I mean, you look at the media guides, there's hundreds of people at every team at every level. And it's like amazing, all those jobs. And the same with the Valspar, what was then the J.C. Penney Classic. It was Gerald was the tournament director, and Norma Hesselgrave was his assistant, and that was pretty much it. So I was like the third person in. And again, I've always been what I call part-time, full-time. All year I'm in touch with the tournament, but it's really only in the period like the 3 months before the tournament that I work full-time. But we've now got up to where I think we have 10 people on staff, an expanded sales force, and so everything's so much bigger now. But anyway, I was involved with the J.C. Penney Classic for several years, and then in 2000 we became a PGA Tour event, and in 2009 I think we went to the spring from the fall, and then in 2014 Valspar became our sponsor, and we've really become, I think, a much bigger event since then.
The players, I've broadcast that event. I've been a reporter at that event for Golf Channel. Players rave about the Valspar Championship. Now, I think I have an idea of why they like it so much, but I'd rather hear your opinion. Why do you think the players, you don't have to put on a hard sell to get PGA Tour players to come to Innisbrook? Why do you think that is?
Yeah, our biggest challenge is always the date and the competition we have from events around us where the players are obligated, shall we say, to play. So we're an event that they have to choose to play, and we're so blessed that so many of them have. Well, first of all, we have a great golf course, and it's great in the sense that I think most players would say it is very well balanced between being a very difficult challenge and being fair and not overwhelming and unfair. So, I think if you look, you'll see that most of the players can shoot 71 or 72 on it, but to go down to 67 or 66 or lower, you really have to be golfing your ball, especially if they give tough pin placements. It's a good balance. We've had all kinds of players win here. It's not just for the long hitters, although long hitters have been successful here. I don't think they say, oh, I can't win there. But the guys who are more precise, I think Tommy Fleetwood has kind of said that, boy, I think this is a good track for me. So we've, in the last 9 years, nine tournaments, we always have good competition. We've only had been decided by more than one stroke once in the last 9 tournaments. So the course, I would argue, is a great preparation for Augusta, which usually is 2, 3, 4 weeks after us. Because we're the hilliest course in Florida, and we have pine straw like they do, and the greens are fast and tough. I think they like the fact that we're at a resort, so they can stay on site, and they don't have to drive in from a long way away or make special arrangements. So those are some of the reasons. What do you think?
My first one was the golf course. The players just absolutely love the golf course for exactly the reasons that you just stated. It's not unfair. It's not overly penal. You don't have to grow the rough 6 inches to make it a good challenge. Something 2 or 3 under at the end of the day puts you in contention. And that's the message I hear the most. And then as someone who travels, I completely agree. The events that I like covering the most are the ones where I'm not in a car to get there. If I can walk out of the room and get to the practice tee, that's my favorite event. And your players can do that at the resort at Innisbrook.
And then I think what has really happened, I'm not going to say it was lacking prior to that, but in the Valspar years, the growth of things outside the ropes really also makes the players feel like they are at an important event. Our crowds, especially for the amount of room we have on the course, are large, especially on Friday and Saturday, especially the year Tiger was here. So you feel like, a lot of times I watch even sometimes major championships. Heck, I was watching some of the U.S. Open this year, and there was nobody on certain holes at certain times. And I'm not saying there always are people on our course all the time, but we have good galleries, enthusiastic galleries, and we have a good place, situation for them to change their, locker room facilities and everything. And we take good care of them with food, and the caddies love it. Valspar is the official sponsor of the tourist caddies, and so the caddies love it. And so I think they just have a good feeling when they come to see us. Tracy West, our tournament director, does a great job on a lot of things, but she's very, very strong in terms of building a relationship with all the players. And so we've got guys like Jordan Spieth and Justin Thomas, and I think Tommy Fleetwood now, and then some others whose names can no longer be mentioned, who have come to, but hopefully can be mentioned again, who have come to, really look forward to the tournament as one of the best weeks of the year for them.
All right, well, you took me to it. You brought it up. I was going to save this one for a while. How often do people ask you about Live Golf and the proposed agreement to agree, maybe agree? How often do you get asked about it?
Well, I haven't been asked about it much lately, and we're all still wondering exactly how it's going to unfold. You've got the tour stating that the agreement gives them continued control, but we all know who has a tremendous amount of money engaged in this. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. Looking into next year, into the known, we have benefited. Well, let's see. Last year, our tournament was set up so that the players, we were the only optional tournament among a 4-week stretch. They pretty much had to play Bay Hill, the API. They had to play the Players Championship, and the top 64 in the world were pretty much obligated to play in the match play in Austin. So if you played in our tournament like Tommy Fleetwood, Jordan Spieth, and Justin Thomas, and some others did, they were making a commitment to play 4 in a row. Next year, the match play has gone away for whatever, and there's going to be a tournament in Houston, and I'm sure it'll be a fine event, but it's not an obligation for them. So we think our field will get better. Last year, we were opposite a live event, I think in Arizona, although not that anybody really, to be honest, was paying all that much attention to it. And then we're waiting anxiously to see what the path back to the PGA Tour might be for those players who opted to go to live. Dustin Johnson, I guess I can say, Dustin Johnson and Brooks Koepka played with us in 2021, and Dustin's done well here, and Brooks has done well here. Should they be eligible to play back in our tournament, that would certainly bolster our field if they would do so.
Going back to the topic of money, we were talking about this fantasy golf league. The players that I picked this year collectively won just south of $15 million. Last year, that would have been good enough to win the league, according to you. This year, I was 5th.
Right.
And that's largely because of these, what are now called signature events, these elevated events, these elevated purses. What does all of this do to affect the Valspar Championship? You mentioned the date, and that's always something to be aware of. But what else about the new structure do you think will affect Valspar?
I don't know that we will. I mean, most of the elevated events, and again, it really only is what's going on in your neighborhood. Whether the Travelers or the Heritage in South Carolina, whether or not they're elevated or not, doesn't really affect us, other than to be interested, because the players were going to play some events at that time. So it's really about what's going on around us. We look with interest upon the fields at what was the Honda Classic and what was Bay Hill. And we always thought we hung in there pretty good against Bay Hill before they became elevated. And so when they were elevated, that was interesting to us. I don't know. It didn't seem to be all that crucial to us. I mean, again, as you said, players like our tournament. And if they like our tournament, they're still going to come, I think, and play us. I mean, there's a 3-week run next year, the Valspar, the Houston tournament, and Valero. And so I would think most players are going to play at least one of those 3 events. They're not going to take 3 weeks off. And we would like to think that we'll get, I mean, the odds would say we'd get 1/3 of the good players, and maybe we'll get more.
You mentioned that your schedule ramps up starting about 3 months before the event. You're part-time, full-time, as you put it.
Right.
So when the ramp up starts, what is a typical week?
I don't know if anything's typical. You're always looking to see who's committed to the tournament and what press releases are necessary to do. I'm always looking to see what media have signed up. I mean, my big thing on tournament week is hosting the media center. I'm kind of like in charge of the media until the PGA Tour media officials show up on Monday afternoon of tournament week, and then they kind of are the lead media people. But you want them when they come in at least it looks like we're expecting them with a good media center and stuff and copying machines. Although not that we use copying machines much anymore, but you know what I mean.
One of my previous guests on this podcast was Tracy Veal, who is
Right.
in charge of media credentials. She actually got in touch with me because of the name of the podcast, and she's in charge of media credentialing for the tour in Palm Beach. And one of the topics that we talked about was the rise of alternative media, maybe smaller outlets, a guy with a blog, a guy with a camera who posts on YouTube, independent journalists that are not necessarily the AP or a newspaper. I wonder how you've seen that evolve as the media director. I'm sure you get requests from outlets that you kind of have to check out to find out who they are, right?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned Tracy because she is my she is the go-to resource on this, and I would say we are a team on that. I mean, I have people here in the Tampa Bay market that I have a decent understanding of. They have a history with the tournament, and I can make a call on. But yes, if somebody from Jacksonville or Miami or Atlanta says, hey, I got this, whatever, Tracy pretty much is the one that they better be on the good side of, because I'm not going to, if she says don't credential them, I'm not going to. But yeah, and conversely, is the decline of the what would be called the traditional media. I mean, you still get a tremendous amount of information about golf, more than you ever have through Twitter and other places. I mean, I'm so glad I have so many people I follow on Twitter in the golf world because I see all kinds of interesting stuff. But it's certainly not coming necessarily from traditional sources. And or even if it's a blog and a golf magazine, that's probably not really a magazine anymore. It's more like a website. We used to have like 5, 6, 7 Florida newspapers covering this, and I think last year only the Tampa Bay Times was in the room. So yes, it's interesting.
How many credentials will you issue, do you think, for the 2024 tournament, and how much of a drop, if it's a drop, would that be from your peak?
It's of course, issuing credentials is an interesting thing because sometimes, like the TV stations, the local TV stations give you a list of people, some of whom you don't see the course of the week. So, but they don't want to have to worry about who they're going to assign to come out to the tournament. But I don't know, it's over 100, I guess. And I don't know that it's changed all that much because, again, for the ones that have gone away in the traditional world, there's more and more that are showing up that are of interest.
As we record this mid-September, there was a carriage dispute between Charter Communications and Disney that was recently resolved, which put all the ESPN family of networks back on Spectrum cable. And there was a lot of conversation about these cable sports channels going to a streaming-only service. And Disney has more or less said out loud, ESPN is going in that direction. At some point, we're going to offer it as a streaming service, and you have to pay us directly to watch it. As someone who's been in the business for a long time, just a general thought about the cable model versus the streaming model and where you think this is going.
Oh, I definitely think it's obviously you're onto something. It's headed to the streaming world, and I wouldn't shock me in baseball or basketball or hockey that the leagues might sell all their rights if they have them. They would sell all their rights. Baseball, I think, is headed in that direction to a single entity. Like I believe MLS. Let's go back. Messi signs with Miami. Mm-hmm. And as a moderate soccer fan, I said, boy, I'd like to see maybe a Messi game. And I was surprised to find that I had to get an Apple TV subscription to do that.
Right.
Because they pretty much locked up all of MLS at a time that MLS is, doing pretty good. Well, I could see where that's going to be the case for perhaps all the sports but the NFL sooner rather than later, as things sort out. I was in the presence of somebody who's very knowledgeable about stuff in the NBA, and they are operating under the assumption that Apple TV and Amazon are lurking out there with piles of cash that a traditional network like TBS or ESPN might not be able to match.
I find it to be a little bit surprising that MLS was at the forefront of this, because I tend to agree with you. Certainly in Major League Baseball, that looks like where it's going, that model you described. And in the NBA, that's also likely, although, as you say, Turner and ESPN are going to make a run. But I'm a little surprised, I guess, and again, your thought, that MLS was the first one to say, you know what, we're going to put everything on one platform. I mean, you can't watch an MLS game on cable TV now, which is an unheard of thing to say 2 years ago. And yet here we are.
Right. I mean, I can't even watch it on my smart TV with all the, I have to, and I dare I say it, I did try to get an Apple TV subscription and couldn't figure out how to do it. So, not that I searched too long, but, it involved a QR code. I'm like, what? On my TV? What? So, I mean, I'd be more interested to know what the feeling is in the MLS markets. I mean, did those teams have local rights? I mean, was there a time that FC Orlando was on an Orlando over-the-air TV station?
Yes. Yeah, there was. Orlando City would play.
Orlando City. Sorry.
Yeah, on like the local CW affiliate or the over-the-air station that was a sister station to one of the network affiliates. Mm-hmm. And that was very common. That's how you saw the games. And now, like you said, you've got to have a subscription. And I don't want to watch Cincinnati. And I guess maybe I'm old-fashioned, but I'd rather watch the team that I want to watch.
I mean, I can relate to it a little bit because I do follow some English soccer teams. And so, I do go to my ESPN Plus account and look to see if they're on. Okay, boy, I can watch them today. I haven't gotten into the MLS experience as much. So, I mean, it's not that bad if you're sitting here in Florida and you can watch an English team at your convenience, and I guess you can record them and do all kinds of other things. So I don't know. It'll sort out. I'm going to assume that most of the people that are working, I hope so, most of the people that are working for the current broadcasts will eventually evolve over into the streaming world, but we'll see.
Bringing it back to golf, you brought up ESPN Plus. Your thoughts on PGA Tour Live, going from one stream to 4 streams almost every week of the PGA Tour season?
Yeah, it is amazing how much it's there you have it. It's a great product actually I think golf has a pretty good combination right now because there's a lot of product on the Golf Channel, but if you want even more product, ESPN Plus certainly has it. So yeah, it's never been a better time to follow the PGA Tour. You can, between the online where you can watch, where I don't know if you can watch shot by shot, but you can certainly follow your favorite golfer, in real time. But yeah, it's going to get to the point that so much of what we can do is on what would be the computer world and not necessarily the TV world. Just as what's happened to radio now. I don't know that I have a radio in my house that could listen to a game.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I mean, I sometimes listen to I'll listen to Ray's radio in the car, but if I'm here in the house, I'm either watching the Bally streaming service or watching with the Rays or just kind of following the game through MLB.com.
Switching gears, Copperhead Charities is the body that organizes the charitable giving coming out of the Valspar Championship. And I was on their website earlier today. Since 1977, the number is $50 million generated for charities in the Tampa Bay area. And we in golf repeat this often, and it's not cheesy. It's true that golf gives more money to charity each year than all the other North American sports leagues combined. And that's just the model of these tournaments. who are some of the beneficiaries in Tampa Bay?
We have over 100 of them. Habitat for Humanity, Valspar has a relationship with Habitat for Humanity, and we've picked up on that. As a tournament, we built, I think it's 7 houses. We also have Tampa General Hospital, TGH, is a big sponsor of ours. But through our Birdies for Charity program, we have a lot of even like smaller organizations. If they want to be involved with us, they can do something we call Birdies for Charity and solicit contributions, and then we give a boost upon the contributions they solicit, and it's a great program. So it can be as few as a couple $1,000s to tens of thousands of dollars. We were over $1 million last year, and of course that's our biggest challenge. I mean, it's exciting to hear people like our general chair, co-general chair actually this year is Rondé Barber, who works for the tournament for as a volunteer, basically. To hear them talk about how they are so focused on what our charitable number is at the end of the year is kind of inspiring. It's always a balance with the tournament in terms of, do we spend this money to make the fan experience better? But that would cut into our charity line. I mean, we want the fans to have a great time, but we also want, to have money left over to give to charity. So how many porta potties do you contract for? I mean, or how many concession stands do you set up? So it's a great balance, but we've been fortunate that we've been able to turn. When we say turn a profit, that means the amount of money that we're going to give to charity each year.
And can you give like a 2-minute version of how those charitable dollars are generated? Because I think a lot of people who don't follow the tour very closely don't understand that model.
Well, we're like a business. I mean, let's put it this way. The acquisition and paying of the players, that's done by Valspar through their sponsorship. Valspar pays for the purse. PGA Tour provides the players and the officials that run the tournament. And I'm sure that Valspar gives some money to the tour for their general operations. So, but what we do is we are the group, the Copperhead Charities. ProLink Sports is the management company, and ProLink Sports now has 3 PGA Tour events, also the Wells Fargo and the 3M Open, and a bunch on the Champions Tour. We stage the tournament, so that's all the structures, that's the ticketing, that's the food, the roping, that's the fences. I mean, we have to pay for all that with funds that are generated locally through either sponsorships or ticket sales mainly. And so when you take the sponsorships and the ticket sales and you siphon out the expenses, such as I outlined, then you have what in a normal organization would be your profit. But that profit is, as a 401c3, something that we send to charities.
Of all of the responsibilities you have during the course of the year, whether it's with golf, with the NFL, Major League Baseball, hockey, do you have a favorite, or is that too tough of a question?
I still, after all these years, I still enjoy the travel and seeing NFL games every Sunday. I mean, for 46 years, especially now, because I usually have one of the best seats in the house. We're on the 50-yard line, for God. That's fun. I love the Rays and I love the Lightning. We didn't even talk much about the Lightning, which might be my favorite, me personally, my favorite team. So to have worked with Rick Peckham and Dave Randorf in that regard, that's tremendous. And then the tournament can be a bit of a grind, but when we get to tournament week and then we're adding a champion to our list of champions and showing him around and all that, that's great too. So I don't know. I've been very blessed, and I think I'm lucky that I have such a diverse group of things. So if any one of them were to ever get boring, well, I'm moving on to something else.
This is a question that I ask a lot of guests. And I'm sure you get asked to come speak at maybe high school classes or college classes, and you get asked for advice about people who are considering a career in sports media, in public relations in your case. What kinds of things do you tell them?
Show up, be available. You can't, if you're asked to work, you better do everything you can to say yes to that, because you might not get asked again. And then once you work, just kind of be, don't cause problems. and get to know people. And if they like the job you're doing, they might find other work for you. So I guess I'm a big believer in just being there as opposed to studying per se. I think you pick things up by doing it. I can think of some guys in especially the TV world who just kind of started as like day runners who are, directing major telecasts now. Now, they went to college and did other things like that, but it was showing up and being available to work on weekends, footing the bill to travel maybe to a game a couple 100 miles away and not getting all excited that they were reaching into their pockets to fund it. And then they started getting asked to do more things. And next thing you know, they're, producing and directing major telecasts within 20 years. Yeah, Charlie Dameyer, I knew him when he was just a computer stats operator for Fox, going to school at the University of Maryland during the week and coming to games on the weekends. And, he's directing Notre Dame football for NBC now. Chuck McDonald did that at Texas A&M when he was a student there. And he's now producing the Fox lead football telecast. And there's others. So, yeah. Ultimately, you'll rise or fall on your abilities and skills, but you have to put yourself in position to catch somebody's eye to impress people. And that's what I say is important.
In just a few seconds, we'll have some closing thoughts on this episode, so stay tuned. If you're enjoying it so far, please consider subscribing or sharing and leave a review. Let me know what you'd like to hear in the future on Media Credentials. Hearing the name Ricky Bell really took me back. He was the Bucs' #1 overall pick in the 1977 draft, reuniting with John McKay, his college coach at USC. He had a monster year as a running back in 1979 when the Bucs won a playoff game for the first time. But by 1982, Bell's production had declined mysteriously and sharply, and he was traded to San Diego. He played just 4 games for the Chargers and retired before the 1983 season. It turns out Bell had dermatomyositis, an inflammatory condition that affects muscles and skin. In his case, it caused heart failure, and Bell passed away in 1984 at the age of 29. Doug Williams, of course, became the first black quarterback to start and win a Super Bowl, doing so not for the Bucs, but for Washington in Super Bowl 22 over the Denver Broncos. Rick's final comments mirror a consistent theme that I hear in these interviews. Those who work in sports media will rise and fall according to their abilities, he said, but it's mostly about showing up, putting yourself in position to get noticed, taking advantage of every opportunity no matter how small. In other words, always say yes. And by the way, the Valspar Championship at Innisbrook returns March 18th to the 24th in 2024. Thanks again for listening to Media Credentials. For examples of my work, including video and audio clips, a blog, and my contact page, check out whitwatson.com.